Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Damley, Supreme Court has held since 1884 case Burrow-Giles Lithographic Company versus Cerrone that photographs can be entitled to copyright protection where the photographer makes decisions regarding creative elements of the work. You were quoted in your testimony as saying society embraced the camera as a creative tool and photography blossomed as an art form that deepened rather than diminished this whole field of creativity. There's no reason to believe AI is any different, I think was your point. The Copyright Office has disputed this comparison, instead comparing the generative AI to a client who hires an artist to create something because users do not exercise ultimate creative control. What's kind of your response or your thoughts to copyright comparison? And do you believe that copyright was correct in denying copyright for lack of the ultimate creative control as they did in their decision in Zarya of the Dawn?
Congressman, thank you for that question. So the way I would start by framing this issue is the point I was trying to make in my testimony is that generative AI can be a tool that humans use to enhance their creative output. And so what the Copyright Office has said is where that tool is doing all of the work of creative output, then that's a situation where we don't need the economic incentive that the Constitution has as an incentive for creating that output. But I think that's sort of one end of the spectrum of the question. There's going to be a big gray area where there's going to be basically human and AI together creating output. I think that's going to be a very common situation going forward. And I think in that situation, I would say, where the human is exercising some control over the AI and its output, where there's a sort of iterative process between what the generative AI produces and what the human produces, then that is a situation where you should have copyrightable output, that the output of that process should be copyrightable to some degree. And it's no different, I think, than a camera, than a photographer's interaction with a camera. They're adjusting the settings on the camera. They're choosing the framing of the image. They're employing a lot of choice. Yes, the camera is the one that's actually recording the image, but the human has control over that process. And so by the same token, where a human has that level of control over the generative AI process, as I think will happen in many cases, then the output of that should be copyrightable in the same way that a photograph is copyrightable.
Reiterate that, do you think copyright got this correct in the way that they had came up with their determination?
I think in the particular instance and the particular things that they said, I think they got it right. But they're addressing a very just sort of extreme example where the human is not actually providing anything other than a simple prompt to the generative AI system. And then they've decided in that instance, the output is not copyrightable. I think that's going to be very different than the mine run of cases using generative AI. The mine run of cases are going to involve much more involvement of human authorship than just providing a simple, one-sentence prompt.
Yeah, so just because I just have 1 minute left to actually, so what other situations do you think could emerge that copyright would then have to deal with where you do find this mix of artistry along with what AI has capabilities of doing that could somehow, put us in a place where it can be undetermined who actually is the creator?
So I think those are going to have to be determined on a case-by-case basis. And the office actually, in its guidance, provided some examples, a few examples, but some examples of where there would be sort of enough creative human authorship. For instance, where you provide a prompt, it generates an image, and then you adjust that image. The human actually takes that image as a starting point and then adds more creative authorship to that image. That's one example. I think another example that you might see is where you start with an image that you have, I'm using an image ones as an example, but you start with an image, you feed it into the generative AI, and then generative AI helps you make changes to that image in certain ways, in the same way that you might use Photoshop. I think in those circumstances, you're gonna have situations where the output is copyrightable, and then there may be questions about how much of it is copyrightable, how much of it was generated by the AI, but those can be dealt with on a fact-by-fact basis.
Thank you very much, and I would yield back.